Welcome back to the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire. We're looking to put a couple of more assets on your wildfire crew, like Zeus, Aeolus, and maybe even Poseidon. I have got an amazing guest today. I've got Lisa Gonzales-Kramer, and Lisa is an expert in mast reforestation. For those of you who don't know what mast reforestation is, I'm going to let Lisa tell you herself. Lisa, welcome to the Fire Break. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me. And let me just say I am the VP of Forest Carbon Development at Mast Reforestation. I lead a team that works to reforest forests in post-wildfire events. So yeah, that's our work, to restore those forests that likely would never return without human intervention.
Okay, so we took a little human intervention to cause a fire. Now we're going to require some human intervention to restore nature to either what it was before the fire, or hopefully to something better, something less flammable. What's the size of your team, and how do you choose your projects?
Yeah, well, Mast is a startup, a tech startup that started with drone reforestation, and we're currently focused on traditional methods for reforesting. We have a team of about 40 people at Mast, and we also have two nursery entities as well. Together, the three companies are one vertically integrated company under Mast Reforestation. So we provide seed collection, cone surveys, and collections. We have the largest nursery in California as
Wow.
well, providing about 90% of the seedlings for California reforestation. We have the oldest and I think the largest west of the Rockies seed bank as well. So we're vertically integrated. We have the supply chain to actually reforest, but we also fund that at zero cost to the landowner. We fund reforestation using carbon market financing to restore these forests that have been lost and will no longer regenerate on their own.
Okay, so I think most people could probably understand the idea, you plant trees, or you either put seedlings or seeds or trees in. But what about this carbon market thing? That's hard to visualize. And what is that?
It is. Thank you for that question, because it is hard to kind of visualize here. So what we use is to fund our restoration activities with the carbon market. And I'm not sure how many people really understand how challenging and costly it is to restore a forest. And so what often happens after a wildfire is a landowner not only has gone through wildfire, may have lost a home, uh, hopefully not loved ones, but there's a great deal of loss going on. For these forest landowners that are small forest landowners, also what they lose in the case of a wildfire is often what would represent somebody's college tuition, or the ability to
That
fund
in state or
long-term
out of
care
state
for a
tuition?
loved one. Yeah, in state or out of state, right. Or the ability to pay for someone's long-term care. And so these
Okay,
forests really are investments, and really important investments for
very much.
small rural landowners. And so what we do is we come in, they're able to receive the restoration of their property with our expertise, because we are experts in post-wildfire restorations in these specific types of conditions. And then we actually register that project with a registry that says we went in and restored a forest where none would have grown before. And so that's considered additional to what was the baseline of converting to a brush field, and we actually are able to sell carbon credits to a buyer who needs to offset their future emissions, and that money then comes back to pay for that restoration for the landowner as well.
I see. Okay. So how do you make tactical decisions about where to reforest and where not to? Let's say you have 100 miles of contiguous forest, right, which is just a giant matchstick waiting to be lit. And right at that 50-mile mark, somebody gets a fire and it clears essentially, a mile of fire break. Would it not, in some cases, be in the best interest of overall forest health to leave that fire break in place rather than to restore it? And how do you make those decisions?
Yeah, great question. And I think that those decisions are really cross-jurisdictional decisions between state, federal, local, landowners and private landowners to kind of decide where those fire breaks are best positioned. I think the other side of this, though, is also what have we lost in terms of ecosystem services, for example. So if you're talking about a devastation over that wide of a range, it's also affecting watershed function, habitat, and sometimes threatened and endangered species, but specifically water, as we're in a environment that is in a time in which water as a precious resource is really not as well understood as probably we should be understanding it. And so these where these forests are being lost are also watersheds. So landscape scale watershed function is being affected. And when you replant this forest, you're restoring that function, which means precipitation is going to fall more softly on the ground. It's going to allow that precipitation to percolate into the aquifer at a reasonable rate. It's going to deliver cleaner, cool, fresh water to downstream communities. It's going to restore the health of that watershed in terms of wildlife habitat, fisheries, and also the habitat that's needed for the water courses as riparian areas and wetlands and things like that. So all of this is part of the benefit that goes just beyond the landowner to the wider community, and all of us benefit from that.
Okay. So essentially, forest good, burn scar bad.
Yeah, because that burn scar will restore to, for example, a converted brush field, which is basically you've lost the forest habitat, that rich diversity of species and everything that goes along that. With that is now also lost. So the converted brush fields, we have quite a lot of that in California, especially in some of these burn scars. And so looking to those willing landowners who do want their forest restored. I mean, we're always working with those who are asking for our assistance and rightfully should have the opportunity to restore their land if that's an opportunity they want to engage in.
And I imagine everyone wants the microwave version of this, right? I want my forest back and I want it back tomorrow.
Yes, and it's a good point. It takes time. It takes time to actually, from the time that forest is burned, you have to find out if you've got seed available. And so this is why it's just one more thing that's one more reason why we are so devoted at Mast to collecting the seed ahead of these large-scale fires, to really improving the forest, the workforce for forestry to be able to engage in better, more kind of predictive seed collection. So we know where we're missing seed from and actually being able to collect that ahead of wildfires so that when we come to a situation like this where we're missing seed, we don't have to make hard decisions about if we reforest something or if we migrate, and is that migration, is that a positive benefit or effect? All of those questions come into play, and we haven't even actually grown the seedling yet, right? So it's a very complex process in which you're working within the changing climate. You're working in a really disturbed environment that's lost. For example, all the organic matter is burned away, the nutrients in the soil. There's no shade available to speak of. It's got a huge amount of dead biomass on the site that is just, it's part of the reason it burns so hot in the first place, but it's not generally consumed to the degree that you would have expected. And so there's still a huge amount, a heavy amount of of biomass left on the site that has to be cleared away or opened up so that the planters can actually get in and plant seedlings. So it is a complex process. This is why we
Very
have
complex.
a lot of brilliant minds in the game, to really look at this holistically, including where are the fire breaks? How are we going to restore in collaboration with the fire breaks that are existing natural fire breaks, as well as whatever has also been lost on the perimeter of these properties that we're restoring.
So I guess another decision is when you go back to replant an area, are you going to go back with what was there, or are you going to come back with what should be there or what should have been there or what
Yeah,
was
it's a
originally there?
good question, and it is a balancing act. It's also what's available to you as well. So we have a changing climate, and I have been in this type of restoration work now for 14 years. It's like I see things changing before my eyes in terms of the elevational zones that different species are moving to in the mountain regions, right? And so what we look at is again a holistic picture about what is this changing climate going to support as we get in and make this restoration, and also what is going to survive now, right? So we have to balance from what seedlings will survive now, and then what's going to happen in 50, 100, 200 years from now. So we're really looking at this is really the cutting edge of climate science as we're trying to also restore and mitigate for this current situation.
That's really such an interesting set of margins that you have to work with there, right? That
Yeah.
Yes, in 2024, 25, this is a great climate for this seedling, but based on what we know this climate's going to be 50 years from now, this tree will die. So what tree, right, would survive here 50 years
Right,
from now, and
right.
would its seedlings survive now, and where's the balance between them? That's such an interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting. And I think we're looking at what are those species that have the greatest range? Do we even have that question answered? And if so, where, does it grow in this area, or should it be in this area? Right. And so, yeah, all of these, they're really complex questions that we grapple with for every site that we work with. So it keeps us very busy.
So do you hedge your bets there and put a
We
variety of
do.
trees in? I see.
Yes. So we do. So we do have some general guidelines, and one is we're going to restore the native species. There, we're not going to bring anything in that is, not natural to the system. So we're looking at when we're making judgments about what we're putting in there. We're generally taking trees that were cones and seed were harvested from a lower elevation, and we're good with migrating them uphill, right? Because
Yeah.
that is how the climate is warming. And so we'll generally migrate seed from lower elevations to higher elevations. Sometimes you can also move them across the landscape depending on different things like rain shadows in the mountains and things like that. So we look at that and really put together the puzzle pieces for what we think would be the best resilient, what I call it, climate and wildfire resilient forests. And that's what we're looking to achieve here for the forest health over time. We're also planting at lower densities in general, because we know that, we had forests that were overstocked, right? And so
Right.
we are looking at warmer, drier forests. They have less water within that ecosystem. So we're going to plant to what that ecosystem can support. And even as we're planting these forests, we're creating shade and microsites so that then that helps to keep things cooler than would normally have happened over time. And then the other thing that we do, especially in our case with carbon projects, Mast also provides the landowner with a long-term endowment to manage that forest over time, specifically for the next 100 years, so that they have money for thinning and forest health management, so that it keeps that forest at a resilient level as the climate changes. And so we're really committed not only to just restoring those forests today, but keeping them healthy over time so that it's possible to have a fire move through there in the future. Because Steve, you and I both know it's going to have another fire, right? We all know fire's going to burn. It's just a matter of when. And are we prepared? Are forests resilient? And that's what we're aiming for as we look and restore and leave the landowner with something hopefully better than they ever imagined.
When you say a landowner and their forest, is this me with my 4 acres, or is this a community with its 10,000 acres, or is this some guy who has 400,000 acres? Like what
Yeah.
size parcel of forest qualifies to be in your program?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So I would say a couple of things. Our mission at Mast Reforest is to scale reforestation to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. And so
Okay.
we are looking to scale on this 400,000 acre property. That matters to us. And so we are preparing and engaging our team to put in place all of the infrastructure to actually scale reforestation, especially across the Intermountain West, where we've lost so much forest in the last few decades, right? And so we're interested in landowners that have smaller holdings. There are programs. It's not something that Mast does, but there are other programs that do aggregate forest landowners, and they make them into basically one project, so that there is really important economies of scale just because it is so expensive to restore an ecosystem to the degree that we are doing this for climate and wildfire resiliency. And so you do need that economy of scales, and we are also looking like, how fast can we mitigate? How fast can we do this? Because it's so necessary. You probably know this figure better than I do, but in the United States, we've had on a rolling average per decade, we're burning about 7 million acres a year of forest land or of land, right, across the United States. And that has increased since previous to the 90s. It was 2 million acres, right? And so we're burning about an additional size, about the size of New Jersey. So that's 5 million
Some people
acres
would
that
say that
we're
might not be a
losing.
bad thing, really.
But you know what I'm saying.
I grew up in the
So,
tri-state area. I could say that, but
but there is an urgency to it, and so
absolutely.
that's what that's the enormity of the problem that we're facing here.
I see. So you're looking at what, 3.5 to 4 times the flame consumption right now on lands. So it's really
Hmm.
escalated.
Hmm.
So when you go to restore an area, how long a process is that? Uh, because
Yeah,
you talked about the lack of shade, for instance. So do you have to plant, one set of seedlings, and then when they've got to be 8 or 10 feet tall, they create some shade, then it's time to go in with a next set, that can only survive with some shade? Or how does that whole process
sure.
work?
Yeah, no, is really a balance. I've done a number of things to actually um, help seedlings to become established. So we work with the planting crew to find the areas where down logs are going to be the shade that these seedlings will start to establish in. We're looking for the shade of shrubs, not too close, not too far, because of course we don't want the water competition. Where we find that it's more successful on the north and the east side of the landscape in terms of aspects. So we know we're more likely to have success there than on the drier south and western slopes. And so we're looking at all of the angles in which we can basically eke out any shade that possible. And I think that, all of that, we look and we expect mortality to happen in some areas. So we plant a little bit more so that we know some seedlings won't survive. And that's a natural ecosystem process. Not every seedling is going to survive when it drops from a tree. So yeah, we take that, what the ecosystem can offer us in terms of things to be successful, and we build on that. We plant mostly 1 or 2 years in a row just for restoration. We're not going to come back in additionally to plant more over time. That would be ideal because then you get an uneven managed, uneven aged forest. But we just don't have that, the capacity to do that at this time.
I see. Okay. So it
Yeah.
would feel a little bit alien to walk through that forest, like, when I walk into a high school and everyone's the same age and they're all much younger than me. So, right.
Oh,
So,
yeah. But
pretty much
over
anywhere I walk
time,
these days, that's true, right?
over time, that forest will start to drop its own seed and have other cohorts or generations of seedlings come up as well. So over the life of the next 100, 200 years, you will find that forest will have more uneven aged, dynamic process to the structure of that forest.
Are you able to pre-mobilize resources at all based on the pretty good uh, modeling that we have of where the next fires are going to be?
Yeah, I think for us, in terms of pre-mobilization, it all comes in to the aspect of prediction for where seed is going to be needed, right? What hasn't
Okay.
burned lately? What is likely to be next? What's burned recently that, either there's, a few trees, refugia, we call that, trees remaining where we might be able to collect from to help restore what's already been burned. And I think, as fires are burning, we have been in situations where we know seed is available, but can we get in and out in case the wind blows that direction? We need to be, of course, out of there before there's any risk factor. So yeah, our crews are not fire trained, but they are there to respond in safe situations to go in and collect seed as we see things developing over every summer. Yeah, every
So how
summer
do
I
you, how do
say,
you,
every fire season we'll say, because that starts so
because
early and
it's
ends
every
so
year,
late now,
right?
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. Yeah. So how do you work with what I will call fire deniers, right? These would be people where your numbers say this place is ripe for fire, and you go in and you say we should do some seed collection around here, and they say, oh well, this is upstate New York. We don't get wildfires here, right? Because
Hmm.
traditionally that may have been true, although it's not going to be true in the future. So
Hmm.
you've got to
Hmm.
do some convincing there, I imagine, to get people to participate in the seed preservation
Yeah,
projects.
yeah, yeah. It's I think for us, it's we have so many willing people that are willing to work with us. It's not about whether we convince them that there's going to be a fire in the future.
Okay.
Um, there is so much work to be done, and our resources are have to be directed to where we're going to be most effective. And so those are the situations that we'll go into. I think the other aspect of this, especially, I don't know, as you get into the summertime and cones are ripening and uh, people who find out about our work or notice us, looking up to the top of the trees to see what's up there and if cones are developing and, is it possibly a good collection site? Those people are very interested and want to support the work that we're doing. Who doesn't want to plant a seedling, right? Who doesn't want to, find a way to keep the forest healthy? And so we get really good volunteerism on the part of the people and landowners that are working with us. So it's refreshing. It's the one part of the conversation that's just about hope and about life, and everybody is like, "Oh yeah, here's what I can do." Right?
Right. So you're planting the next forest fire.
Yeah, yeah,
In some cases, right? Like
right.
that they're going to come through, but you're trying to plant these new forests in a way where they'll be more resilient to fire.
Correct. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So where do you learn about what makes a fire more resilient? Because I think a lot of what we thought we knew about it might not be true, especially in hotter, drier, windier climates. So
Yeah.
it seems like it would be hard to anticipate, what forest characteristics are going to make a forest more resilient to fires that are 50 years from now that we really don't know
Yeah.
what their characteristics will be. How do you
Yeah.
play with that?
Yeah, Steve, I operate with the understanding that the more we learn, the more we know, the more we realize we don't know, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
yeah, it's absolutely the way I operate. And so while we look for the best available science, especially in these specific ecosystems, we know that is likely going to change, and we're going to try and just keep getting the right, general direction for getting this right. And so that's kind of how I approach it. I also have, 14 years of post-wildfire restoration in a catastrophic wildfire burn. So I know better about what's going to survive over the first decade or more than a
Okay.
decade now. So that helps me get to the point that we establish those seedlings with more confidence that they will survive that initial year where it's so hard, the conditions are so harsh in that post-wildfire environment. You've got to think about it. We're going into what is essentially looks like a moonscape and saying, hey, we think a forest is going to survive here, right? So we have
Right.
to really, really build on that and use our expertise that we've built on from the previous generations, but also what we've been learning in this whole great experiment of restoring forests to be climate and wildfire resilient. So we're going to continue to learn lessons, and so that is not lost on me.
And I'm curious, you said, we know you've been in this for 14 years, and things have changed in that last 14 years. Are there things that you do now that you wouldn't have done then, and vice versa? Are there practices that were common then that now, would no longer be indicated?
Yeah, I would say not necessarily. I would say just improvement of the practices, greater understanding. I think greater understanding of the need for good controlled burns, right? For good and thoughtful forest thinning, for the collaboration among all of the stakeholders. And there's so much, especially in California, the way I experience this is just so much really good collaboration across state, federal, local, all of these different agencies that all are in this together, knowing that my border isn't the end of where that fire might burn through, and vice versa. And so we have a lot of really good working groups across the state to identify what are the areas most at risk. How can we direct dollars to assist these areas in fire prevention, as well as restoration from the aftermath of these catastrophic burns. And so that is one thing that I've seen like dramatic change from when I started. I think we can do better with conversation around just the restoration methods that we're using. So better understanding of the nuances within an ecosystem. So someone might come up with a great idea and it will work great in this system, but definitely not in that. And so I think just the understanding that these complexities are stuff that natural resource managers and restoration scientists and foresters are all working within just even one ownership of the ecosystem, right? And so
Right.
this is a need for conversation, for understanding, for a little bit of grace as people are trying to figure this out. And like, we don't have all the answers, but we're still working together to come up with these solutions.
So you said you provide funding to keep these projects growing for the next 50 to 100 years. So I'm guessing that those funds are tied to the land and not to the owner. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. They'll follow the land, and basically they're designated for specific types of thinning. So we because it's a carbon project, we're protecting the amount of carbon in there that we have said is going to be growing in there. And so we're managing to that level of canopy cover and basal area, meaning the diameter of the trees as they grow. We look for those forest metrics and we manage to that, and we predict what's going to need to be thinned through the growth of that forest, how much will need to be thinned at about what decade. And so those are the projections that we put in place as we fund the endowment.
I was kind of excited. I thought that the basal area was where you supported the work of the pesto makers.
Yeah. Well, it could be that too. Yeah, I'm very much in support of that as well.
And you said something else that that triggered an imagination. You said it was really like coming into a lunar scape, right, where it was barren and nothing there, and you're trying to figure out what's the best way to put a forest in here. But that made me wonder about what about the actual lunar landscape on the moon, which, if we're talking 50 to 100 years from now, we may be living there, or may have factories and explorers out there. Is there anything that we've learned about growing forests here on Earth that would help us to vegetate the moon?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. I have actually not thought much about that. I do have to say, really enjoyed The Martian because it's similar to, trying to find a way to actually terraform to a degree. At least in The Martian, it was about, potatoes. But essentially, I think that the landscape there, while I don't know much about that at all, I know that it does not currently hold the nutrients that we need or that we consider necessary for forest development. And so it really always starts with the soil. It always starts with the soil to make sure it's got enough organic matter in that and enough nutrients to support that vegetation growth over time. So that's where I would start my investigations. And I'm sorry, it might sound like I'm just assuming that we've solved the atmosphere question. So beyond the atmosphere question.
Create atmospheres, right?
Exactly. That's true. Yeah.
Right. So if we wanted to have an atmosphere, we would start with some form of photosynthesis that could use whatever the gases are and then generate some oxygen for us. So that's, I say that's down the road, but down the road comes up on us so fast.
So
you talked about the importance for nutrients, though. So how do you go in and restore, the nutrients into an area to make it ready to receive seedlings and saplings?
Yeah, that is one thing that we don't have the opportunity to put new nutrients in the soil. What we find, and what I've found throughout my work, is that in some cases ash really does provide some nutrient. It's in a different form than previous to the fire, of course, and there's much less of those nutrients in the soil as well. And so, but again, it's working within what the ecosystem does offer, right? In terms of the nutrients, the water accessibility, the shade, even the wind breaks are important. And so, finding those areas that do have some residual soils, some residual organic matter, that's where we're going to target our planting to really help ensure, or let's say, improve the chance of that seedling's survival.
Okay. So if you took slash piles from nearby operations and put them in the areas where you were going to do reforestation, and then you added, bacteria, mushrooms, whatever, things that would help those break down, would they break down into soils that would then support a reforestation operation?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. In fact, it is a management strategy in some areas. I should have mentioned this. So one of them, the management strategies, are to take some of that heavy biomass that has been burned and actually masticate it. And so you break it up, and when you do that, Steve, you would know this from fire behavior, you're taking that vertical continuity of fuel and actually restructuring that and laying it on the ground, right? And so now you've got more horizontal continuity. And when we're looking at building fire resilient forests, we're looking at how that landscape is going to behave with fire as it moves through the landscape the next time. But one of the things with respect to mastication is that when you lay that fuel on the ground and it's now broken up into smaller pieces, it is going to degrade faster. And the trick is to not build it up to be a thick mat, but to make a thinner mat that then is going to degrade faster and return those nutrients. It's the same nutrients that were held in that tree to start with are going to be needed by the next seedling, and so that does help. It allows the nutrients to return to the soil sooner. It also provides more moisture to the ground and the rooting level. It prevents some of the growth of invasive species. So it really is one of the mechanisms and methodologies that we use for forest restoration. And let me say, there's quite a few different types of methodologies. I've mentioned some of them, but this is also one as well.
There's so much to consider here.
I know. It's such an interesting, it's just such an interesting topic. I really enjoy it.
So, so you talked about the science, and I suppose that at some level, the science becomes the science, right? There's a way to do this, and we learn from what works and what doesn't work, and we develop best practices. So that part, I think, sounds navigable. But you talked about the need to work with so many different agencies and stakeholders. And you said everyone was willing to do that, but how do you really achieve consensus between a landowner, the county extension, the state, the federal, like everyone who's got their fingerprints on this project? How do you get them all to agree on, well, to start with, the science?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you don't. And so but the dialogue has to happen, right? And so this is part of what I'm saying. What may absolutely work great in one area doesn't mean that it's going to work in another. It also doesn't mean that it's not a great, methodology or way to deal with restoration and forest health. There are just different applications in different locations, and I think that that's the important thing as land managers and natural resource protection experts. We need to be talking and having that dialogue about those nuances, because it's not a one size fits all, and everybody, I think, understands that, but sometimes maybe the rhetoric doesn't quite allow for that. And I think that that's part of the need for communication across these different agencies and different, what might seem like competing objectives really do need to be blended. And I think that that's part of why it's so important to have these meetings similar, the conferences that we were at, the Red Sky Summit, last month or earlier this month. I mean, those kind of cross-jurisdictional conversations, and every type of entity, nonprofit, startups and government agencies across the board need to be having these conversations, because it's that dynamic conversation where all the minds are in the great game and really wanting to accomplish the same thing ultimately. That's where these dialogues need to happen, and then filter down to the rest of these stakeholders. And the landowners, need to be engaged and understand their land and their opportunities and their responsibilities, and help to be part of that conversation as well.
I see. And you when you talked about the best practices that come out of these meetings and groups, like Red Sky Summit, I would compare and ask about this, because you said a certain level of mortality was expected, right? You planted a lot of seedlings and some of them make it and some don't. And presumably the conditions are the same for all the seedlings. But the genetic composition of each seedling is a little bit different. And certain of them have the genetic compositions to thrive under those conditions and some don't. And that's how we figure out, what was best there. Now, we can't know what the conditions are going to be and how they're going to change. So we can't really anticipate uniformly what the best genetic composition is going to be, because what's great for right now won't be great for this winter or 10 years from now or 50 years from now. So that genetic the variance is really important to the survival. And I just wonder if the same thing applies in reforestation practices and other things where we try to develop a best practice, which means that we're agreeing that this is the best way to do things. And when conditions change, if we're all doing that best practice, then we're all doing the thing that's going to perish. And so to what degree do you promote best practices that are actually at odds with each other, knowing that because conditions are going to change, what you consider a worst practice right now, 20 years from now might be a best practice. So how do you get that genetic idea diversity into the reforestation process?
Yeah. So I would say that variability is our insurance plan, right?
Okay. Yes.
We have to have variability built into all of our strategies, and I kind of think about it in terms of this. So on a landscape, the conditions are not all the same, even within the same landscape, right? And so you have riparian zones, or the edges of rivers or streams are different, or than the higher slopes, or there might be windswept slopes that are so exposed, and some that are much more sheltered. Some receive more rainfall and others don't. So I approach restoration as this variable approach to the characteristics of the landscape that we can observe, and then we use numerous approaches to what our best practices are. So I would say, I think to answer your question, it's getting to that place where we all agree there are numerous best practices, and it depends on the situation in which you're encountering, in which that kind of best practice goes into effect. It cannot be a one size fits all. That's what's kind of got us into this situation, I think.
You know what, Lisa, this is cool. We have an actual live question here from Travis at
Oh,
3M
wow.
Fire Protection. He wants to know whether you focus only on rebuilding forests, or do you also focus on restoring grasslands?
That is a great question. And one of the things that how I approach an ecosystem is that it's much more than just forest. Forests are intermixed with grasslands and meadows, and like I said, riparian areas and wetlands. And so when I look at, restoring forests, I'm looking broadly at the whole palette, and I'm looking at where was that forest before, and how can we restore that forest. What I have as my greatest desire is that the carbon funding actually really is able to be used in these other ecosystems. And there are protocols for other ecosystems, grasslands, wetlands, oceans, and these are a little bit more nascent than, for example, the forest protocols in terms of how carbon is monetized in the carbon market. Frequently is based on nature-based solutions that involve forests. Less so, there are protocols coming out for grasslands, or there are protocols out for grasslands and meadows and things like that. But we don't specifically, Mast doesn't specifically engage in those ecosystems, other than to protect what already existed there and not plant over it, not do anything that's going to disturb that. And part of it's also part of our strategy for resilience, right? Again, if we're looking at vertical and horizontal continuity of the fuels over time, we need those open spaces. That means the fire moves in, it's in the canopy and the treetops. It no longer has a treetop, it drops to the ground, travels horizontally, and it's a lower flame, a lower intensity. That's what helps us manage fires in resilient forest ecosystems, is because it's not just a forest. It's all of these other ecosystems blended in within that whole palette of conditions.
So interesting, right? It's
I
the
hope,
more
yeah, I
I
hope
guess what you probably find, right, the more you get into it, as you said earlier, the more you realize what you don't know, and the greater the complexity of the thing. But also, I would imagine the greater your appreciation is for what nature has created.
Absolutely. I am absolutely under no false impression that I'm going to do better than nature itself, right? So yeah, these ecosystems have evolved over, I don't know, billions of years, right? And so we're just stepping in at this place where we've disturbed the ecosystem in the first place by not allowing its natural fire regime. And now we're coming into that to kind of help recover. But I'm under no illusion that I'm doing what is exactly would have been there in the case of a more natural fire.
Yeah. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
Right. Am I right? You learn what you can, you do the best you can, and then eventually, humans are gone, and the world restores itself.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think right. So what we're doing, are we trying to restore nature, or are we trying to manipulate the planet so that it's healthiest for supporting us?
Sure.
I mean, the
Are you
planet's a big
asking me
rock.
that? Is that a
It's not
rhetorical
going anywhere,
question?
right? Yeah. Well, I'm asking, when we talk about how we're going to manipulate nature or come in and restore what we think was there or should be there. Are we thinking just in terms of what's best for forest health or for tree health, or are we trying to manipulate the environment so that more of the type of species that are alive now continue to be alive, versus the ones that will be here in 200 years or 300 years when the planet is, hotter and different?
Yeah.
Basically,
Yeah, it is
how
part
long do
of
we hold on to what we have, right?
Right. Well, and I think that if we think about it, we couldn't restore to what's going to be in the future because we don't have those conditions right now, right? We don't know really what's going to happen in 200 to 300 years, right? So we couldn't even necessarily make the right guess. So what we have to work with now, and our greatest hope, is to restore to what is within that band of survival now and for the next 50 to 100 years. And from there, we just have to understand that our planet has evolved and it will continue to evolve and change. We cannot hold on to one ecosystem when, naturally it's going to evolve. But right now, what we're doing is restoring what we know is able to survive here and now and in the next 50 to 100 years and maybe beyond that. And that is where we can make the best effective impact on climate change at this moment. And beyond that, we'll be discovering.
I don't think anyone could have said that better. Let me step back and ask an amateur question. Most people think of a mast as what's on a boat. Which came first? The use of the word mast for a tree, or the use of the word mast for the thing you attach your sail to?
I could not even guess at that one. I am not sure, but I do think I think the point of that though is that mast reforestation specifically is named after mast to do with the development of cones. So I wanted just to kind of explain that for a minute here. So a mast event in the life of a tree or a forest is when the cone production on those trees are at its greatest production, at its greatest productivity. And so if a forest has a mast event, that is the time to go out and collect the seeds or the cones so that you have a successful harvest, right? That's what mast is named after, not the mast of the ship, but the mast of
It happens to be made out
cones
of
and
trees.
cone production.
Okay.
Exactly. Right.
You can see
Right.
why that would be confusing to people, right? Or at least
Yeah,
why
that's
it's
true.
confusing to me. Right. Okay. So so these mast events, or when trees are most harvestable, is that based? It's I guess it's both, but on where the tree is in its life cycle and where the tree is in the season. Like,
Yeah.
how do you anticipate when these events are going to be right for you?
Right. The only way you can really anticipate is by keeping an eye on the growth of those cones from one season to the next, and from early in the summer to the fall. So there are some species that take a long time to begin producing cone. For example, sugar pine take 30 years before they'll produce cone that will basically yield seeds. Um, we have coulter pines that take maybe 10 years or so, and so they'll start producing cones, and they can start reproduction at 2 decades earlier than a sugar pine. But within the individual species, they each are on their own cycle of cone
Oh,
production, and it may be every 4 years, it may be every 7, in which they'll have a higher year of productivity. That's genetically how it is kind of it follows, but also conditions have to be right. If you're in a drought, or if you're just after a drought, those change the conditions in which a mast event will occur. So sometimes if trees have been stressed, they'll have a great year of production because they're so stressed that they actually tend to produce more cones. And we think that's an ecological, an evolutionary feature of some species, and that production happens more after a stress event, just in terms of ensuring that survival of that species after that stress event.
and you would hope that those additional mast events would involve more gene mutation as well, so that you're more likely to have something that survives whatever the stress was that was killing the tree in the
Hmm.
first place, right?
Yeah,
Don't be like
that's
me. I
true.
didn't survive this fire. Be different. Right? Be shorter, fatter,
Yeah,
skinnier, put your leaves up higher, or whatever. Right. So
yeah,
those.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's
So
a
do you think that? Go ahead.
I was just saying it's an important question, and we certainly need more research on that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we lose forests, right, basically we're returning the carbon from which those trees were made to the air, which is something we're trying to do less of. And when we plant new forests, we're grabbing that carbon back and turning it back into wood, essentially. So
Hmm.
so when we talk about projects other than mass reforestation for carbon capture, uh, to me it would seem that you're never going to get as efficient a carbon capture technology as a tree. That is going to right. They're solar powered. They run on wind and water and sun, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Why do you think
Yeah,
we continue to have projects that attempt mechanical uh, carbon sequestration or carbon capture when trees seem to have got this pretty well dialed in?
yeah, great question. And I think it's actually we need a balance of both, because trees are, through photosynthesis, really efficient at carbon capture. I think the challenge is that it's a slower growth, especially in North America. And so, at the scale that we really need it, the growing trees is taking longer, right? It has to be done. It also, growing forests offer these other ecosystem benefits, though, as well. And so there are many, many reasons to plant a forest, and it's great that carbon can help that restoration in the process of that restoration. But I also think in terms of other types of carbon capture. We just had grasslands, as I mentioned. There are other types of ways in which the ecosystem captures carbon in the soils and in the oceans. And so all of these nature-based solutions are at our fingertips if we could just build on them. And so those are really important. I think, though, that there's also this sense of urgency internationally. I mean, we all feel this sense of urgency of climate change, and there are reasons that there are additional minds in the game looking at other non-nature-based solutions. And I don't see that as a bad thing, just because of the urgency of the situation that we're in at this point. But certainly, I'm prone to understand the myriad of benefits that happen when we look at forests or other types of ecosystems that are again doing things beyond what we even know about today. Like, again, we know a lot, but there's so much that we don't know, and it's preserving that interdependence of us with ecosystems and ecosystems with each other that is going to help make us resilient as a planet.
How do you sleep at night? So much to think about. My goodness.
I know. I know.
Yeah, and I'm curious about another thing. Left on its own, and let's say the temperature of the planet continues to creep up, and so it gets warmer, and there's more evaporation, and there's more humidity, and therefore more rain, and we burn up the forest, so there's more carbon in the air. Wouldn't this combination of warmer, wetter, and more carbon be a great recipe for vegetation? Maybe not so great for us.
Actually, yeah. So that's a good point. I think that there's more carbon dioxide because that's what the trees breathe, right? That's going to be helpful for plants and trees specifically. A little bit warmer climate, yes. But there is that range. There's a range at which you go beyond, and no, the trees aren't going to be able to survive, not as we know them today. So, do we know what that total range is? We got some pretty good ideas. That's why everyone's trying to stay under 1.5 degrees, 2.0. We're all kind of like looking at how much we can stay within that, because that's kind of the known space at this point. But beyond, to your point, you get beyond that limit of heat, and that's going to cause things to collapse.
Let's hope that doesn't happen, because we don't need to make a souffle out of this place, do we?
That is true. Right.
No collapse.
Yeah.
Boy, Lisa, I could probably go on with questions for hours, but I'm going to save some of them for when we meet up again. Which I hope we'll do.
I would love that, Steve. I've really enjoyed this. Yeah, I've just so enjoyed the conversation. You have great questions, and just following through on all these threads that I do think about quite a lot and are part of not just my work, but my life. So I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation.
Yeah, the beauty of a forest isn't theoretical to you. You live in the middle of a beautiful one. So I hope that is on your list of things to be thankful for as we come into Thanksgiving. And I want to thank you so much for giving me an hour of your time and your wisdom and a glimpse into this really interesting and intricate and complicated set of challenges that you've set for yourself. So thank you so much. Lisa Gonzales-Kramer. You can follow up more. You can find her easily on LinkedIn, and hopefully the state of California will be consulting with her as they figure out how to spend some of this new Proposition 4 money to protect natural resources and restore them. So you've been listening to The Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, just want to thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure.
You bet. Thank you so much, Lisa. All right. The Fire Break, as you know, is sponsored by Team Wildfire. And the reason we have guests like Lisa and all of the other people on the show is because we know fixing this is going to be a team effort, and everyone contributes a little bit. And some people even contribute a lot. So thank you so much. We'll see you at the next one. Take care.